there's an intrinsic quality of being a baby in the womb in this webinar, which isn't a memory of when we were being in the womb with our mother. Because we're holding it within ourselves, because we are being aware of our chalice, the uterus for the women and the prostate for the men. We are the mother, and also we go into a space of conception and then womb life, so we are the baby. So it's held within us, and it connects to the universal energies, to our original matrix of that time. And we can go through womb life, and we can gestate and go through the different levels of womb life, which is a tremendously significant journey. It is a fundamental place where a lot of our patterns start from. If something happens to you when you're 45 and it creates an upset and different things happen, it's quite late in your life and won't be as deep rooted as something that happens in the womb, or in my mind it's not. And because it's before memory, there are cellular memories, we can access it through cellular memories, but there isn't a normal memory and there isn't an intellect at that time. It can go in at quite a deep level. And certainly around, if from our mother's birth, if she was thinking of terminating you as a baby or something like that, it's life-threatening. It's a fear of leaving your life, losing your life. So there is this intrinsic womb life that we will be going into. But memories will come from when we were in the womb, and maybe early childhood, or just fear of that time in your life, or maybe it just, for some people it may just feel good, for others they may have reservations. For some people the life in the womb may feel very nice, for others it may feel toxic. You are inside your mother, so you are affected by her moods. If she's having arguments, if she's having a hard time, if she's having a good time, you are affected and aware of all of that. So obviously it's a place where things start. And the feedback that I've had from people is that as we work through this, it clears things like injuries or illnesses just disappearing. One of the things that always plagued me through my life, and from a young child, I had pneumonia, I always had weak lungs, and I wasn't sure if that was just from, I had an abusive relationship with my mother, or a physically abusive relation, whether it was from that or something that happened in the womb, or just part of my genetics or part of my past karma. And I made a remedy for myself, because that was so much coming up to the surface to be cleared by this process. So the feedback is that people are losing or letting go of deep-seated patterns or deep-seated injuries. And different people have even mentioned like injuries that they had later on in life, and they are going through this gestation experience, and in that experience it's a bit like that injury just disappears. If they had a broken bone that wasn't set properly or something like that, while they're in that experience it's kind of gone, it's just not there anymore, and then afterwards it's very much lessened. So I think this is an area that we will continue to explore, and we will work with that intrinsic birth as we were before. We will let memories come from either past lives, from being in our mother's womb. Again, you're at that age, you're very close to past lives or whatever happened before that time. So that is much more available. And with my chest, I think something like I got gassed in the First World War. There's something like that, and definitely in the second week of this, it was no longer the trauma or things that happened to me in the womb. There was this First World War soldier there. So, I, along with what happened in the womb, I think I was gassed in the First World War, and that had an effect on my lungs that pervaded into lifetimes after that. My feeling with the First World War was a shed load of people died, they came back, they got to the Second World War, and they all died again. They're just the right distance apart, really, for that to happen. I kind of think that may have been what happened to me in that one, because there's also some memories of that too. So we will be working with that, but the feedback I'm getting now for this week is in that meditation we are putting a lot of emphasis on the chalice. For new people, the chalice is the uterus and prostate, and the seed is the ovaries and testes. So we're put to bring people into that area and to experience a universal conception into that area, and an intrinsic and universal womb life. We're obviously bringing a lot of attention to that area. And I also want to include the lungs and chest more in this one when we're in that experience of being in the womb, and also the brain and the hypothalamus. Because I think as we work more and more and the uterus or the chalice clears, then we're privy or open to a new energy rising. Certainly I'm much more aware of it, of the energy rising up from that area and affecting the heart and spreading out into the lungs. And for the women, that also works into the breasts, and the men, we've got energy breasts or just the energy of that in this area, and that is more the emotional content. We have to take into account, you don't have to kind of go through them or have a catharsis or something like that, but you have to allow the awareness of the quality of the emotions, to let them start turning, to letting them unfold. So my feeling is as we've worked through, we've cleared a lot of energy in the chalice and in the seed, and that's risen up. Now that's working through the emotional body and also the mind. So we're taking on board more. We will be doing more than in the last webinars, and it was easy to stay in the womb and in the experience of being a baby in the womb if we are just being aware of the chalice. But if you also start being aware of the heart and lungs and breasts, it can bring you a little bit of out of that experience. But hopefully people have practiced it enough to start letting it clear through that area as well, and also through the intellect, through the third eye, through the eyes as it goes through the brain. The other thing that I can't avoid when I'm working with the chalice, which is the prostate for me, I can't avoid the breathing motion of holographic breathing in that area, which can be hard when people first start learning that, because it is opposite to how it is taught just about everywhere else. Everywhere else that I know of, it's described as the pelvic floor drops down on the in-breath as you breathe in. The pelvic floor rises as you breathe out, and they give exercises for that. You let it go down as you breathe in, and you really tighten up your pelvic floor on the out breath and push all the air out. I personally think they've got it wrong. I think that's come, and I may be wrong, maybe it's just for holographic breathing, and maybe I've got it wrong for holographic breathing, I don't know. I'm not a master or know everything, but my experience is I think how people describe it is that the diaphragm is pushing down, and so that pushes down the pelvic floor. For me, that's a very simplistic way of looking at it, and for me, wrong. The muscles of the diaphragm are connecting through the back, through the abdomen, down into the pelvic floor. And the abdomen doesn't just relax and open on the in-breath, there's a tension to it. It's kind of opening with a bit of a tension held in it. But for me, the pelvic floor is tightening as the diaphragm comes down. The pelvic floor tightens to it. They move together, or at least the pelvic floor holds still, and the diaphragm comes down, and that is what causes the opening. And then on the out breath, they're drifting apart. Now, if you incorporate that into your breathing, that rather than just relaxing and opening the pelvic floor on the in-breath, that there's a tension running through it. There's not a big tension, there's just a slight stress for it to hold its ground, for it not to give. It brings your breath completely down into that area. It also starts initiating the Kundalini. If you just let it relax down and out on the in-breath, it undoes the energy of holographic breathing. It takes the energy away. But if you just let it hold its place, then this energy starts moving through it. It opens up the Kundalini. And for me, it ignites at a place, the energy place for the chalice in the pelvic floor is the perineum. Different areas of the pelvic floor relate to different organs. And for the chalice, what relates to it and is directly below it is the perineum. For the men, the prostate is sitting directly above it. For the women, the vagina is angled backwards. So it's between the perineum's between the vagina and the rectum, and because it's angled backwards, the uterus, or the start of the uterus, is directly above the perineum. And that relates the area of the diaphragm that is relating to the heart and relating to the chalice and relating to the perineum is the bit of the diaphragm directly under the heart. It's not just the lungs are pulling down as the diaphragm is doing this, the heart pulling down on the in-breath and rising on the out-breath. The heart is moving. The heart isn't fixed to your sternum. The heart is fixed to the diaphragm. So as the diaphragm moves, the heart moves, and energetically that area under the heart is part of this circuit. So you've got the perineum, you've got the chalice, you've got the area of this diaphragm here. I'll show you the anatomy in a bit, but where that relates to the roof of the mouth is the diaphragm, and part of the energies of the fire circuit, which I'm going to show you in a minute. And the center of the roof of the mouth, in the same as the center of the diaphragm, is the fire circuit, relates to the chalice. And just forwards in the cranium, again I'll show you the anatomy in a bit, you've got another, the base of the fire sphenix, which also relates to the chalice. And these are all pulling together on the in-breath. See, the diaphragms on the in-breath, they're doing this, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. All the diaphragms are flattening and widening on the in-breath, and all the diaphragms are rising and arching. And it's the same for the pubic arch. Breathing in, it's rising and flattening. Breathing out. So it's doing exactly the same thing, but the dome is the other way up. So all of these diaphragms, they stretch and flatten. And rather than having the pelvic floor just dropping away on the in-breath, it gives all of these diaphragms above it and all of the energy points to do with the chalice. It gives them an anchor. It gives them something to pull towards on the in-breath and drift away from on the out-breath. So I'm going to include that. I mean, over the last week, I've been doing that, and I've been thinking, oh my God, too much. I can't include this in the meditation because we're already doing all of this other stuff. But we have to, really, because if I don't do the energies of what's coming through on the day, it doesn't work. So you kind of get what's going on in me on the day, or you know, I've meditated and worked with what we're going to be, and the culmination of it normally comes that morning. So on the other ones where there were this big karma that came up, you got that, whether I wanted to say it or not, that was there. And today this is there, the breathing motion of the chalice. And again, it's easy to get pulled out of the experience of being the baby in the womb and feeling that. You can kind of feel it as the mother, but it takes you out a bit of being the experience of the baby. But to include it as the baby in the womb, you have to have yourself as the baby, shortening and widening on the in-breath, lengthening and narrowing on the out-breath. In craniosacral therapy, this is the movement that Sutherland talks about, the founder of craniosacral therapy. He doesn't say everything expands in all directions on the in-breath and everything contracts together on the out-breath. That is impossible. You can't do that. The lungs can, because air is coming in, but the whole rest of your body can't grow in volume. Your abdomen can't grow in volume on the in-breath. It's not growing in volume, it's shortening top to bottom and expanding to the sides. Your brain can't grow in volume on the in-breath. It's shortening and expanding. It's narrowing and lengthening. And that's how Sutherland, I know it's not the breath we work with, the physical breath we work with in holographic breathing, but he described the motion of the breath of life from craniosacral therapies. Everything expanding out and shortening top to bottom on the in-breath. Everything narrowing and lengthening on the out-breath. And exactly the same motion is available in holographic breathing. But it's not easy cookies. It's not how we're used to breathing. It may feel, some people, very strange, some people, you know, different people find holographic breathing difficult in some ways, or easy, and some people love it, and it was always funny. There was one person who always found it hard, and I taught him this bit that everybody else was, and he just said, "Why didn't you teach us that at the beginning? That makes all sense now, I can do it now." And other people just cannot get their head around it. Now, I don't know if that is because maybe people have been taught other things, or just have a different image, because on this shortening top to bottom on the in-breath, it means if you're working with your spine, it means the whole spine is shortening as you breathe in, and the whole spine is lengthening as you breathe out. And some people just find that hard to be with. And you have to go about that whole breathing in a very gentle way. And even though I mainly feel when I do it, I can do it both ways. I can let my pelvic floor drop on the in-breath, and it feels much more comfortable and much easier. But it takes the energy away of holographic breathing. Or I can raise the pelvic floor, which is normally how I experience. I experience this and everything expanding and that. But how I'm going to teach it, because I find it much easier, is just to feel a slight stressing through the pelvic floor that is just holding its own against the diaphragm pulling down, just holding the space. And that is much easier to be with, but it changes the breath. It drops the breath from the chest right down into the pelvic floor. It becomes a much slower breath. It's as if you're filling up with fluid on the in-breath and emptying it out. You can't breathe in and out quickly. It becomes a much slower, more profound breath. But there's all sorts of different things we have to take into account. So I'm going to include that in the meditation. And it may take away from the spiritual energies coming in. It may take away from our experience of being in the womb. But seemingly one way or another we got to include that too. We are. But now for me, in holographic breathing, that just naturally happens with the in-breath. It just does this on the in-breath and drops on the out-breath. And I was listening to a Soma thing, if people know what that is, Soma breathing, and they've taken a lot from Ayurvedic yoga and pranayama. And to raise the Kundalini, what they do is they take the in-breath and then they'll hold it, but when they get to the in-breath, then they pull up the pelvic floor to raise the Kundalini. And I think, well, we're doing that with every breath in holographic breathing. It's just naturally part of, your normal breathing, it's not with it, but in holographic breathing, and it's a shame that it's hard for people to get that feeling. And I think what happened, I think we breathe like this in the womb, it's enacted in breastfeeding, and somewhere through childhood, maybe as the intellect develops or things that, I think we've swapped to a different type of breathing. And I think that's why it's a bit like an initiation when I first teach people hologram. Even though it's simple, no one's done it before, and it's because you have to go through this initiation for it to start. And for me, that breathing in and it pulling, it completely, you can't breathe how you're normally breathing. You can't breathe in the chest. It anchors your heart, not just into the abdomen. When people say breathe into your abdomen, it anchors it into your pelvic floor, and it raises the Kundalini.